I wanted to say a few short words about the so-called situation that is in the media and that has been so-called long heralded, which is the coming solstice of the coming weekend, which is the 22nd and 23rd of September, where many have associated it with the fulfillment of a prophecy, a biblical prophecy, which we men have seen said is Revelation 12, which is where the woman appears in the sky, which would basically, just to get that out of the way, would be the Virgo constellation, and she has a crown of stars on top of her head, and she's clad in the sun, and the moon is under her feet. And at Revelation 12:5, she gives birth to the Son of Man, who is raptured up to heaven, and which basically there is a consensus regarding that this so-called seemingly represents a sort of a rapture of sorts. A rapture would mean that there would be a quantum leap, if you wish, to another frequency. All of this obviously is also associated with the whole Mandela effect and the idea that there would be like two groups now on one earth who have different recollections about the past historically. But I wanted to speak to this different, I think, from most of the people who are speaking about this, and more in terms of the inside of it, because extensive work on dreams and shared dreaming and collective dreaming has also sort of unearthed the same theme, in which I have very long now spoken to, which would be like the separation of the timelines. I have spoken to this often in terms of the separation of the timelines. So you can see this video as maybe the culmination of all of this for now, in which maybe I can say a few definitive things about what is supposed to happen if indeed this biblical scripture of this woman, Virgo, is a representation of a sort of a map of meaning, a divine map of meaning regarding historical events, prophetic, eschatological events. Obviously, all referring to sort of an end of cycle, which I've also spoken about in the past as the Euroboric cycle of descent and ascent. I think the point is that we're reaching a kind of a end of cycle, and I've spoken in the past that there would be like a split of timelines happening then. But so I just want to get out of the way the more external stuff, and then I want to speak to the inner stuff of how people would need to get ready for this. But so the idea would be that in more modern terms, that at the end of the cycle we would have a kind of a split of timelines. In terms of modern physics, we would say that there would be like a separation into a parallel dimension, meaning a bifurcation of the energy of consciousness, and one side would then so-called end up on a parallel world, and the other would remain on Earth, but probably make a quantum leap to another frequency, which would then be the completion of the cycle, and then the group that is going to the parallel would be like the complete inverse of that. Obviously, this is nothing new. It's in each and every Hollywood movie and movie that is being made, in which we see like an in the movie Stranger Things, we see an upside down dimension sort of landing on Earth, and then almost every movie is about that there's this under grid that is coming in, spider web. And then the people that are so-called raptured there are like the zombie, have been zombified, and they are the ones that are in sort of conjoined and interfacing with this upside-down world, which should really be a parallel dimension, but of a very dark nature. But the people obviously being put on those trains, the dreams show them as the trains to a Holocaust work/death camp. Into this parallel, they would obviously think it's going into a Cinderella fairy tale, but it is one would almost say the realization or fulfillment of the whole Nazi program of the death camps, which was just, let's say, perfected into a perfect interdimensional prison camp. If obviously the force running the Nazi project was obviously what we would call the devil. But the point would be that what is happening would be from the inside would be the two raptures would really mean the two marriages. And the marriage of the Lamb would be the people that have via compassion and integration of their shadow. One has to be very clear on this because there's a lot of anti-shadow work out there, pretending to be shadow work and thinking that touching your shadow means that you drown in all of the pain that you're running away from, which is not the case. The shadow work means that you have compassion for parts of you that because of abuse have been rejected or cut off by yourself. In a nutshell, it means that if you contain the shadow and the opposite of it, we would create a kind of a inwardness self that is not so in a obsessive compulsive relationship with things outside of itself, which means that it's not a victim anymore of the external things, but more able to contain an inward, inside-out view of things. And within that self would land what we call the capital S self, which should be like the self that is whole, but also living on another dimension because it is beyond the electromagnetic grid. And these cells would be like the nodes on what we would call the heavenly grid or the quantum grid in the right side up, which would be like that other dimension that is landing, or what we would call in biblical terms the heavenly grid. So at this point of the 23rd, from that point, the two grids would have landed, and then the people would start to be sort of raptured into either side, almost, like you could visualize it like as two UFOs having landed. But the heavenly grid would land on Earth, and terraform the Earth back into paraspots and paradises. But then the other one would take the people off planet. We know that off planet really means out of body, given that the Earth is a collective body. And that would be like into a dark astral, but having landed the dark grid, and we call it it's a prison grid because this is the whole what everybody's referring to as the planet X or the death planet, because these are death camps, and I will explain what process leads to that now. But this is also why for instance, around the world, people are like having these images of of FEMA camps and death camps, but this is what they are really unconsciously getting into, feeling that is going to happen or that is happening. So the thing is that the controlled opposition would sort of make that look like something physical around us now in 3D. But the reality of it is that it's happening as we speak on an energetic dimensional level, and what we see. So what we will look, how will it look like on this side is that people would disappear into psychotic bubbles and will be sort of raptured into a zombie state, and then they basically uploaded to this death camp. So even the idea of the death planet X would really be this parallel dimension coming in. The point is that this other track to the upside down marriage, because the marriage of the Lamb would be the people who find their true self. Those are the nodes on this heavenly grid. And the Lamb would be reference to the collective self. So they would The marriage of the Lamb would be a marriage with the self, your own self, inwardly, which would lead to connecting to the Lamb, which would be like the connect in a deep connectivity, which is the collective self, which would be basically that light body, collective light, heavenly earth, if you wish, the grid. The other side, to create what are the brides of the goats. And then we get the imagery of all these artists, that are all, with the goat hooves and the horns and the sign in the hands and all of that. Look, I've literally heard people tell me that when they are in the upside down mode, they cannot do anything else but take that sign in their hands. They're the horn in the hand sign. They say it's almost automatic. They don't even do it, but because they want to. They catch themselves putting up that sign automatically, and they say that when they're not in that state, it doesn't happen. So the point with the other track would be these brides, we call them tombstones, and you can see it in the last videos, the musical video of this girl that comes out as a zombie. What's her name?
Taylor Swift.
Yeah. So it's obviously it started already with Michael Jackson, but with Taylor Swift, she comes out as a zombie, and then she basically that zombie is what we call the tombstone, and that is the bride of the goat, because it is an empty vessel, a ghost ship that is created via the cutting off of the shadow and the upside down containment of the opposites. Mind you, this is why the New Age program to create these tombstones for the rapture off to the prison camp is so indistinguishable from the real process of containment of the opposites, because they also work with the opposites, but they contain them in separation of each other. So we would say technically they are caught in containing their projections, because the projection is a externalization of an inner split, and they would contain the split outwardly, thus, which would turn it upside down, and that would take them out of body, which would be the tombstone, is somebody that is technically living out of body, because that's a empty vessel, meaning dead. Out of the body would be dead, and that would be the vessel which the goat, the spider, would possess. So the zombie is basically this empty vessel that is possessed by the spider, literally, and the spider lives at the center of the upside down web, dark web. And this is how that web comes into the people that are that have been turned into these tombstones. Obviously, if you have the heavenly grid and you have the spider web, and they're both coming in, the one via the true self and the other one via the upside down self, which is the tombstone. For more reference of this, you can see our video called Split, which is where the beast was created because of a trauma-based fragmentation of the self into 23 fragments towards the creation of this empty vessel, which is what we call the beast, because it is possessed by the beast, the dragon. So the tombstone, it starts off with the rejection of the shadow, which turns the person in the outside in hardware. What that means is you get locked down into these different institutions or OCD controlled opposition templates, where you let something outside of you control the inside, where you use money to run away from, for instance, your inner poverty feeling, which would be the shadow. And that can be done with food, health, law, money, relationship. There are all of these. The whole world is held up by these pillars, these lockdown institutions, which keep people in the outside in hardware, due to which they are locked out of inner self. And that is the first step towards a deeper form of possession, because the OCD is really where something outside of you is controlling you, an addiction, if you wish. But we tend to project addiction on, the classical addict, on using drugs. All of these institutions, they are the groundwork of a society that has been energetically locked down in a state outside of itself. And that creates what we call a psychological dead zone in order for the bigger possession to happen, which means that then the spider comes into the tombstone, because that dead zone is a tombstone. It's a spiritually dead human being, a psychologically and spiritually dead human being. So what we've seen in the dreams is that these trains that are picking people up that have turned upside down, nothing alive can board these trains. Somebody has to be psychologically and spiritually killed for this to happen. And it's self-killing, because people are doing this to themselves. The dead zone that is created psychologically because of the OCD then becomes the entrance for the spider web into the person, which is literally a kind of a Morgellons net web that we can see appearing in the body. We are now really, really at the last stage of the first stage of the rapture, so we must speak all of this now for people to know what's going on. The tombstone track creates a public self. In dreams we see that people have no private self. For instance, they're living in a house that is a public space, or that their bathroom is in the hall, in the living room of a public space. What it means is that process that shadow work creates, of creating an inner sense of self where you don't feel that you have to be a reaction to the surrounding or a slave to something outside of you. That has failed in the case of the tombstone, and what you find is a collective self, public self, a hospitality self that is only geared on either the other in any sense of the word. How do I look towards the other? It's a completely objectified self, and that becomes the mummy or the zombie that is then harvested by the spider who lives in the mummy. And this is why every single video and movie has been programming the kids to go into this mummy state. It's not a coincidence that the norm now has been how to pull the face and to cock the eyes in a way that looks like a zombie, and that we know happens when a possession takes place. It has become the mainstream. This video of Taylor Swift is not a coincidence. It is core programming for this crucial juncture of the 22nd and 23rd, in which what we are to witness is a first landing on Earth of the two grids. And the dark grid is also seeking to land, but its landing pad is the mind of the tombstones, or people who have completely disconnected from their core. And almost every program on the planet has been based on creating this, from the church to all of the Eastern meditation forms, which we know now have all been hijacked to rapture people out of their bodies without a self. I need to say that the shadow work is not what they have tried to make of it, and that is either accepting the darkness, and also it is not also the idea no, I don't want to carry all of that pain and drown in it, because who wants to now feel the whole day pain? It's neither of these two. Once we touch the shadow without letting go of the opposite inwardly, and not as projection, we touch what we call the razor's edge. And behind that is the eye of the needle, and immediately we get an infusion of golden energy. And an upgrade starts. It has nothing to do with wallowing in the pain. And the other other side of the darkness and the shadow is also an anti-shadow work programming, because what we know is that we have shadow alters, parts of us that were split off, that are then possessed by darkness. By the demonic realm. So then you get a possessed shadow altar, which is both shadow and possessed. So it's not either one or the other. There is, but that possession has to be purged in order that altar can be reintegrated. But you cannot reintegrate the possessed altar. This is where it's all gone wrong with the people that have been working with shadow work. Because of this differentiation, you have to be by yourself. The shadow work, instead of being jealous of the other, you realize that you are rejecting, you are feeling inner insecurity and feeling that you're not worthy, and then you project that on the other as jealousy. Though the other doesn't want me, you have to then sit with this inner feeling and combust it and reintegrate it to the self, knowing that the part is the self, but the self is not a part. So we don't get lost in that part, possessed by it. We admit it, knowing that it's not the whole self, but just a part that has become, so to speaking, insane because it's been disconnected from the core. The shadow work turns inward into the all oneness, to be alone, but not literally alone, but in the all oneness. Within that, we marry ourselves with the capital S. That's the marriage of the Lamb. That connects on the inside to the eye of the needle, which is where the Lamb waits on us as basically the father of the selves. The other side is to create via identification with the projections, to create these projective bubbles. And the point of not seeing anymore that you are projecting, which is, for instance, jealousy, you enter that, you become possessed by the projection. And to the extreme of that, which we would call an extreme zoom in, super zoom in into the OCD, we get a psychotic bubble where people do not know anymore that they are looking at their own projections, and they believe that it's a literal situation out there. That is the point that the negative rapture can happen. That's the point now where people can be boarded onto these trains. We have been sort of lied to, just to finish, about the nature of the earth. The earth is not an object. You see, to see the earth as an object is an objectification, and that leads to the prostitution of the earth as an object. The earth is our collective body. It's not an object. And if we look at what the body is, the individual body, if at the quantum level, it is energy. So it's just that because of the state, the objectified state of collective consciousness, that we experience not only the earth as an object, but ourselves as an object, which is wrong. That's how we can self-abuse and treat ourselves like an object, because we're living through the eyes of the other looking at us, which is the observation problem. And then you want to pimp yourself out because you're living through the eyes of somebody out there. But the earth from the inside is quantum energy that has been in lockdown because of the collective consciousness lockdown in an objectified state. If we look at that, which is consistent with all of the quantum research that we have now, then the earth is energy, just trapped in the illusory state of an objectified form, which the scientists would call a simulation. But it's not. It is a state in which we sort of are able to look at our projections and become self-aware. But that same state can be glitched into the prison, where people are locked into the outside in mode as I described. But the point is, so we are at a natural juncture where where this state, the people that are graduating to the real inner self state, and those that are becoming tombstone, their consciousness is going to create that bifurcation and create an energetic split in which one side will eventually disappear from the other. One will go into a beautifully disguised prison camp, and the other will go back to the true state, the paranormal state of what we initially once called paradise. And there will be an intermediary group who will want to do the shadow work. At some level, they will have chosen to not fully go. And then there will be a period to get them on board of the right ship. The earth is a ship. So for those who feel, that speaking in these energetic terms is, unscientific and all of that, you have missed the boat. 100 years ago, we jumped to a quantum view of things. Of course, in the upside down sense, because it was looking at the quantum out there. The Higgs boson is out there, looking for some God particle out there, but the self is the Higgs boson, or is the God particle. And so the 22nd, 23rd will be the beginning of the landing of these two grids. And if you're too close to the dark grid, too close to the tombstone state, you will be pulled heavily towards that direction. And the other side will also be pulled. But this is basically what is about the whole solstice that is coming up regarding the 23rd of September is about.